Hi everybody! Welcome back to Goodnight Stories. My name is Lyra, and I will be your guide into whatever book we decide to read tonight. From young readers to young adult novels, my hope is to give you a comfortable space to listen to a story while you work or doze, whatever brings you joy. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of tea. Tonight we jump back into Erin Hunter's Fire and Ice. So, let's begin. Chapter 7. For a moment, none of the cats moved or spoke. Then, Deadfoot growled. Any of the clans could see those clouds. We can't be sure the message is for us. Hopeful news spread through WindClan. Tallstar surveyed his clan, then meowed calmly. Whatever Star Clan has planned for us, today we return to our home. I can smell more rain in the air. It's time we set off. Fireheart felt relieved at the leader's practical tone. The last thing they needed was hysteria at an ominous prophecy. Tallstar led the way out into the chilly morning air. Fireheart and Greystripe followed. The WindClan leader was right. The wind carried the promise of more rain, and soon. Shall we scout ahead? Fireheart offered. Yes, please, replied Tallstar. Let me know if you see dogs, two legs, or rats. My clan is stronger this morning, but we had trouble with dogs on the way out. We must stay alert. Fireheart could see from the worried look in his leader's eyes that Barkface's warning had disturbed him more than his confident words suggested. His clan might be stronger, but it was in no state to fight off attackers. Fireheart raced away with Greystripe at his heels. They took turns going back to the clan, telling Tallstar that the way ahead was clear, or warning him to stay back while the two-leg passed by with a dog. The WindClan cats wordlessly obeyed their leader, plodding on heavy paws in spite of their night's rest. By sun-high, dark clouds had gathered once more, and the first drops of rain were beginning to fall. The ground began to slope upward, and when Fireheart pushed his way through the hedge, he recognized the red dirt track that led away from the two-leg territory and into WindClan's hunting grounds. His spirits soared, and he met Greystripe's gaze with a look of triumph. Nearly there. The muffled tramp of paw steps sounded behind the hedge. Fireheart spun around and darted back into the field. The WindClan cats had caught up with them. Deadfoot was at the head of the group. He looked startled by Fireheart's sudden appearance. This way, Fireheart meowed, showing him the gap through the dripping leaves. He was eager to see WindClan's reaction when they glimpsed the uplands on the other side. With the Deadfoot leading, the cats began to file slowly through. Fireheart followed close behind the last cat, but Deadfoot and two warriors had already leapt the ditch and crossed the track, and were pushing into the hedgerow on the other side. Their pace had quickened. They clearly knew where they were. Fireheart had to sprint to catch up. He followed them through the hedge and kept up with them as they bounded toward the long slope that led to the uplands and their home. At the foot of the slope, Deadfoot and his warriors paused to wait for the rest of the clan. They closed their eyes against the rain but held their heads high. Fireheart could see their chests rising and falling as they breathed in the familiar scents sweeping from the uplands. Fireheart ran back to the rest of the clan, looking for Morningflower. He spotted her walking beside a tabby warrior who held her kit in his mouth. Every few steps, the tortoiseshell queen stretched her head to sniff the wet little bundle. It would not be long now before she could settle her kit into the WindClan nursery. Fireheart fell into step beside Greystripe at the rear. They glanced happily at each other, but didn't speak, too caught up in WindClan's excitement at coming home. Even the elders were moving swiftly now, keeping their bodies low and their eyes narrowed against the rain. As the clan joined Deadfoot at the foot of the slope, the deputy got to his paws, and Tallstar took the lead. Without pausing, Tallstar began to follow a narrow sheep trail through the rough grass and heather. As the clan neared the top, some of the warriors raced ahead again. At the brow of the hill, they made proud silhouettes against the stormy sky, while the wind sent ripples through their fur. Ahead stretched their old hunting grounds. Suddenly, two apprentices charged past Fireheart and bounded away into the familiar heather. Tallstar stiffened. "Wait!" he yelled. "There might be hunting parties from the other clans here." As soon as they heard him, the apprentices skidded to a halt and pelted back to join the clan, their eyes still bright with exhilaration. From a rock-strewn ridge, Fireheart saw the dip in the ground that concealed WindClan's camp. With a purr of delight, Morningflower took her kit from the mouth of the tabby warrior and hurried toward the hollow. Tallstar flicked his tail, and 3 warriors raced forward to escort her as she disappeared over the edge and down into the camp. The WindClan leader paused while the rest of his clan rushed into the sheltering bushes below. He turned to Fireheart and Greystripe, his eyes shining. "My clan is grateful for your help," he meowed. "You have both proved you are warriors worthy of StarClan. WindClan has come home, and it is time for you to return to yours." Fireheart felt a pang of disappointment. He'd wanted to see Morningflower settle in the nursery with her kit, but Tallstar was right. There was no need for them to stay here any longer. Tallstar spoke again. "There may be hostile hunting parties around. One Whisker and Deadfoot will escort you to Fortrees." Fireheart bowed his head. "Thank you, Tallstar." Tallstar called to his warriors and gave them their orders. Then he turned his tired eyes once more to Fireheart. You have served WindClan well. Tell Bluestar that WindClan will not forget it was ThunderClan who brought them home." Deadfoot padded away in the direction of Fortrees. Fireheart and Greystripe walked after him with One Whisker at their side. They stayed close together as they followed a narrow path through a solid mass of gorse that provided good shelter against the rain. Suddenly, One Whisker stopped and sniffed the air. "Rabbit," he called out joyfully before charging away into the gorse. Deadfoot stopped and waited. Fireheart could see a glint in the deputy's tired eyes. There was a rush of paw steps in the distance and the rustle of gorse, then silence. A moment later, One Whisker returned with a large rabbit dangling from his jaws. Greystripe leaned toward Fireheart. "A little better than the RiverClan warriors, eh?" Fireheart purred in agreement. One Whisker dropped the fresh kill on the ground. "Anyone hungry?" They ate the rabbit gratefully. When he'd eaten his share, Fireheart sat up and licked his lips. He felt refreshed by the meal, but a weary coldness was beginning to nag at his bones, and his paws felt sore. If he and Greystripe followed the route they'd come, past Fortrees, they still had a long way to go. What if they took a shortcut through RiverClan's hunting grounds? After all, they were on a mission that had been agreed to, at the gathering, at least, by all the clans. Could RiverClan really object if they passed through their territory? It wasn't as if they were going to steal prey. Fireheart looked around at his companions and meowed tentatively. It'd be quicker if we followed the river." Greystripe looked up from washing his paw. "But that would mean crossing into RiverClan territory." "We could follow the gorge," Fireheart explained. "RiverClan doesn't hunt there. It's too steep for them to get down to the river." Greystripe gently rested a damp paw on the ground. "Even my claws ache," he murmured. "I wouldn't mind taking a shorter route." He turned his yellow eyes hopefully to the WindClan deputy. Deadfoot looked thoughtful. "Tallstar ordered us to travel with you to Fortrees," he meowed. "If you don't want to come with us, we'll understand," Fireheart answered quickly. "We'll only be in RiverClan territory for a blank. I can't see us meeting any trouble." Greystripe nodded, but Deadfoot shook his head. "We couldn't let you go into RiverClan territory alone," he meowed. "You're exhausted. If you did meet trouble, you're in no state to deal with it. We won't meet anyone, Fireheart had convinced himself, and was determined to convince Deadfoot too. Deadfoot gazed at him with wise old eyes. If we did go that way, he mused, it would let RiverClan know that WindClan is back. Fireheart pricked his ears in understanding, and once they've smelled fresh WindClan scent, they might not be so keen to come rabbit hunting in your territory again. One Whisker licked the last traces of fresh kill from his lips and remarked, It'll mean we'll be home before moonrise. You just want to make sure you get a good nest in your den. Deadfoot retorted. His voice was stern, but there was a good-natured gleam in his eyes. Then we're going through RiverClan territory? Fireheart asked. Yes, decided Deadfoot. He changed directions and led the cats along an old badger trail that took them away from the barren uplands. Fireheart pricked his ears in understanding, and once they smelled fresh WindClan scent, they might not be so keen to come rabbit hunting in your territory again. One Whisker licked the last traces of fresh kill from his lips and remarked, It'll mean we'll be home before moonrise. You just want to make sure you get a good nest in your den, Deadfoot retorted. His voice was stern, but there was a good-natured gleam in his eyes. Then we're going through RiverClan territory? Fireheart asked. Yes, decided Deadfoot. He changed direction and led the cats along an old badger trail that took them away from the barren uplands. Soon they were in RiverClan's territory. Even through the wind and the rain, Fireheart could hear the roaring of the river as it crashed and thundered somewhere up ahead. The cats followed the trail toward the noise. The path shrank until it was little more than a narrow strip of grass on the very edge of a deep gorge. On one side, the land stretched upward, steep and rocky. On the other, it plunged straight down. Fireheart could see the far side of the gorge only a few fox lengths away. The space looked tantalizingly narrow, and Fireheart wondered if he could leap the gap, perhaps if he weren't so tired and hungry. His paws prickled with fear at the thought of falling, but he couldn't resist peering over the side. Beneath his paws, the ground dropped away in a sheer cliff. Ferns clung to tiny ledges, their leaves glistening not from the rain, but from the spray of the swollen torrent that foamed at the bottom of the gorge. Fireheart pulled back from the edge, and the fur along his spine bristled with fear. Ahead of him, Deadfoot, One Whisker, and Graystripe plodded steadily on, heads down. They would have to follow this path until they could cut away from it, through the small strip of forest that stood between them and ThunderClan territory. Fireheart stumbled as he hurried to catch up. Deadfoot's ears were pricked and his tail flattened so that it almost dragged along the ground. One Whisker was clearly nervous too. He kept looking sharply up the slope beside them as if he could hear something. Fireheart could hear nothing but the roaring of the river. He glanced anxiously over his shoulder, his eyes darting from side to side. The WindClan cat's wariness was making him uneasy. The steep slope began to flatten out until they could move farther away from the cliff edge. The rain was still driving into their faces, and the darkening sky told Fireheart that the sun was setting, but it would not be long now before they reached the forest. There would be more shelter there. The thought of food and a dry nest cheered Fireheart. Suddenly a warning yell rumbled in Deadfoot's throat. Fireheart stiffened and tasted the air. A RiverClan patrol. A screech sounded from behind them, and the cats spun around to see 6 RiverClan warriors charging toward them. Fireheart's fur stood on end with horror. The deep gorge with its raging waters was still dangerously close. A dark brown RiverClan cat landed on top of him. Fireheart rolled away from the gorge, kicking furiously with his back legs. He felt teeth bite into his shoulder and struggled under the weight of this hissing warrior. He scrabbled desperately on the sodden ground, trying to free himself. The RiverClan warrior raked his side with sharp claws. Fireheart twisted and bit into the fur of his attacker. He clamped his jaws tight and heard the warrior yowl, but the other cat's claws only raked him more fiercely. This will be the last time you set foot in RiverClan territory, hissed the brown Tom. Around him, Fireheart was aware of his companions struggling fiercely. He knew they were all exhausted, as he was from the long trek. He could hear Graystripe yowling violently. One Whisker hissed with pain and rage. Then, from the forest behind them, another sound reached Fireheart's ears. It was full of fury, yet it filled Fireheart with a surge of hope. Tiger Claw's war cry. Fireheart smelled the fast-approaching battle scent of a ThunderClan patrol: Tigerclaw, Willowpelt, Whitestorm, and Sandpaw. Yowling and spitting, the ThunderClan cats leapt into the fray. The brown Tom released Fireheart, and he quickly struggled to his paws. He watched as Tigerclaw pinned a gray tabby Tom to the ground, giving a warning bite to the Tom's hind leg. The Tom ran screeching away into the bushes. Tigerclaw whipped around and fixed his pale eyes on Leopard Fur. The mottled gray RiverClan deputy was wrestling with Deadfoot. The lame warrior was no match for the ferocious RiverClan she-cat. Fireheart prepared to leap to the rescue, but Tigerclaw was ahead of him. The dark warrior dived forward and grasped Leopard Fur's wide shoulders. With a mighty yowl, he hauled her off the scrawny WindClan deputy. Fireheart heard a vicious squeal behind him. He spun around to see Sandpaw, locked in battle with another RiverClan she-cat. Twisting and tussling, the pair rolled over and over on the wet grass, spitting and clawing each other fiercely. Fireheart gasped. They were rolling toward the rocky edge of the gorge. One more roll and they would be over the side. Fireheart sprang. With a mighty swipe, he bundled the RiverClan warrior off Sandpaw and away from the edge. Sandpaw skidded away, closer to the drop. Fireheart lunged forward and grabbed her by the scruff of her neck with his teeth. She squealed with rage as he dragged her away from the gorge, her paws scrabbling on the muddy ground. She sprang to her paws as soon as he stopped and hissed at Fireheart, her eyes burning with fury. "I can win my own battles without your help." Fireheart opened his mouth to explain, but a terrible howl made them both turn their heads. Graystripe was leaning perilously over the side of the gorge, his hind legs straining. Beside him, Fireheart glimpsed a white paw clutching at the edge. Graystripe leaned down with his mouth open, trying to get a grip of the paw, but it disappeared out of sight in a terrifying rush. Graystripe cried out after it, his wail echoing along the gorge. All the cats stopped fighting at the sound of Graystripe's agonized call. Fireheart froze, panting with shock and exhaustion. The RiverClan cats scrambled to the edge of the gorge. Slowly, Fireheart followed them and looked over the side. Far below, through the deafening spray, he saw the dark head of a RiverClan warrior sink beneath the foaming water. With a cold feeling of horror, Fireheart recalled the words of the WindClan medicine cat: "This day shall bring an unnecessary death." Chapter 8. Leopard Fur lifted her head and yowled into the wind. "Whiteclaw, no!" Graystripe scrambled backward until all four paws were on the safe ground. His wet fur was bristling, and his eyes were wide with shock. I tried to grab him. He just lost his footing. I didn't mean to." The words tumbled out breathlessly. Fireheart bounded across to his friend and pressed his nose into his flank for comfort. But Graystripe backed blindly away. One by one, the other cats turned away from the edge and looked at Graystripe. The RiverClan cat's eyes were narrowed with fury, their shoulders tense. Willowpelt and Whitestorm moved instinctively toward Graystripe, taking up defensive positions on either side of him. Leopard Fur growled, deep in her throat, but it was a warning to her own cats. They were to stay back. The RiverClan deputy stared Tigerclaw straight in the eye. "This has gone beyond a border fight," she murmured. "We shall return to our clan. It has become a matter to settle at another time in a different way." Tigerclaw defiantly returned Leopard Fur's stare. He showed no fear, but merely gave the smallest of nods. Leopard Fur flicked the tip of her tail, then turned and padded away. The RiverClan cats followed her, and the whole patrol disappeared into the bushes. Leopard Fur's menacing words made Fireheart shiver. A sense of foreboding settled over his heart like a cold shadow as he realized that this battle might have started a war. "We should leave," meowed Deadfoot, limping forward. Your two young warriors served us well, and my clan thanks you." But the formal words of gratitude sounded hollow after the tragedy they had just witnessed. Tigerclaw nodded, and the two WindClan warriors began to head back toward their own territory. Fireheart meowed a quiet farewell to One Whisker as he passed. One Whisker glanced briefly at him and walked on. Fireheart noticed that Sandpaw was standing at the edge of the gorge, Staring down at the torrent below, her paws seemed frozen to the ground, and her eyes remained fixed on the steep drop. Fireheart guessed she had realized how close she had come to sharing White Claw's fate. Fireheart started toward her, but Tiger Claw growled, "Follow me." The tabby warrior charged away through the trees, and the rest of his patrol followed after him. But Fireheart hesitated beside Graystripe. "Come on," he urged. "We should keep up." Graystripe shrugged, his eyes dull and clouded with pain, and began to pad after the others, dragging his paws as if they were made from stone. Soon the cats ahead of them were out of sight, but Fireheart was able to track them by their scent. Tiger Claw was leading them back toward ThunderClan territory, straight through RiverClan's strip of forest. Fireheart guessed there was no need to worry about RiverClan patrols right now. The damage had been done. It would be pointless to take the long way around to Four Trees. Tiger Claw had halted the patrol and was waiting for Fireheart and Graystripe at the border of ThunderClan's territory. "I thought I told you to follow me," he growled. "Graystripe," was Fireheart began. "The sooner Graystripe gets back to camp, the better," interrupted Tiger Claw. Graystripe said nothing, but Fireheart bristled at the deputy's harsh tone. "White Claw's death wasn't my fault." Tiger Claw turned away. "I know," he meowed, "but it's done. Come, and this time keep up." He leapt away, crossing the scent markers that bounded ThunderClan territory. Fireheart had been looking forward to this moment since leaving WindClan's den among the Thunder Paths. Now he hardly noticed as he pounded past the markers, keeping one eye on Graystripe. The rain eased as they followed the familiar trail to the camp. When the patrol emerged from the gorse tunnel, some of the other clan cats bounded out of their dens, their tails head high in greeting. "Did you find WindClan? Are they safe?" Mousefur called. Fireheart nodded absently, but he felt too hollow to reply. Mousefur's tail dropped. The other cats hung back at the edge of the clearing. The expressions on the faces of the returning cats told them that something serious had happened. "Come with me," Tiger Claw ordered, Fireheart and Graystripe leading them toward Bluestar's den. Fireheart kept close to Graystripe so that his fur brushed against his friend. Graystripe just padded onward, neither drawing closer to Fireheart nor moving away. A warm mew welcomed them from the shadows beyond the lichen. The three cats pushed their way into the snug cave. "Welcome," Bluestar leapt up, purring. "Did you find WindClan? Did you bring them back?" "Yes, Bluestar," Fireheart replied quietly. "They are safe in their camp. Tallstar told me to thank you." Good, meowed Bluestar. Her eyes darkened as she noticed Tiger Claw's grim expression. "What has happened?" Fireheart decided to return home through RiverClan territory, growled Tiger Claw. Graystripe looked up for the first time. "It wasn't just Fireheart who decided," he began. Tiger Claw interrupted him. "They were found by a RiverClan patrol. If my patrol hadn't heard their yelps in time, they wouldn't have made it home at all." "So you rescued them," meowed Bluestar, relaxing. "Thank you, Tiger Claw. It's not that simple," Tiger Claw snorted. "They were fighting beside the gorge. A RiverClan warrior who was battling Graystripe fell over the edge." Fireheart noticed Graystripe flinch at Tiger Claw's words. Bluestar's eyes widened. "Dead?" she asked, looking horrified. Fireheart meowed quickly. "It was an accident. Graystripe would never kill a cat over a border fight." "I doubt Leopard Fur sees it that way." Tiger Claw turned on Fireheart, his tail lashing from side to side. "What were you thinking? Traveling through RiverClan territory? And with WindClan cats? You've sent a message that we are their allies, which will only drive RiverClan and ShadowClan closer together. WindClan was with you in RiverClan territory." Bluestar looked even more alarmed. "Just two warriors. Tallstar gave us an escort home. We were tired." Fireheart murmured, "You should not have been in RiverClan territory." Tiger Claw snarled, "Especially with WindClan cats." "It wasn't an alliance. They were just escorting us back home." Fireheart protested. "Does RiverClan know that?" spat Tiger Claw. "RiverClan knew we were going to find WindClan and bring them back. They agreed to it at the gathering. They shouldn't have attacked us. It was a special mission, like the journey to Highstones. They didn't agree to let you travel through their territory," spat Tiger Claw. "You still don't understand Clan's ways, do you?" Bluestar stood up. Her eyes flashed as she looked around at the three cats, but her voice was calm. You should not You should not have entered RiverClan's hunting grounds. It was a dangerous thing to do. She looked sternly from Fireheart to Greystripe. Fireheart searched her eyes for a harsher reproach, but could find none. He felt torn between gratitude and guilt. He had caused a rift with RiverClan that might threaten the safety of his clan for many moons. Bluestar went on, flicking her tail uneasily. At the same time, you did well to find WindClan and bring them back. But we will need to prepare ourselves for an attack from RiverClan. We need to start training more warriors. Fireheart and Greystripe, Frostfur tells me 2 of her kits are almost ready to begin their training. I want each of you to take a kit as your apprentice. Fireheart felt stunned. What an honor. He couldn't believe Bluestar had suggested it, especially now. He glanced furtively at Tigerclaw. The deputy sat rigid as a rock. Greystripe raised his head. But none of Frostfur's kits are 6 moons yet. It won't be long before they are. The divisions at the last gathering troubled me, and today... Bluestar's voice trailed off, and Fireheart noticed Greystripe look down at his paws once more. Tigerclaw was staring at Bluestar, his amber eyes hard. Wouldn't it be better to ask more experienced warriors like Longtail and Darkstripe to take on another apprentice, he asked. These 2 are hardly more than apprentices themselves. I did consider that, replied Bluestar, but Longtail will be busy enough with Swiftpaw, and Darkstripe is getting Dustpaw ready to become a full warrior. What about Runningwind? Tigerclaw asked. Runningwind is a fine hunter and a loyal warrior, Bluestar answered, but I don't think he has the patience for mentoring. ThunderClan has better use for his skills. And you think these 2 have got what it takes to train ThunderClan warriors? Tigerclaw meowed scornfully. Fireheart flinched. Tigerclaw was eyeing him alone as he spoke. Does he think a kitty pet is not fit to train clan-born cats? He wondered angrily. Bluestar stared back at her deputy. We shall find out. Don't forget, they brought WindClan home, and of course, Tigerclaw, she added, I am relying on you to oversee the training. Tigerclaw nodded, and Bluestar turned back to Fireheart and Greystripe. Get something to eat, she ordered, then rest well. We'll have the naming ceremony for the kits at Moon High. Fireheart led Greystripe out of the den, leaving Tigerclaw behind with Bluestar. The rain had eased to a fine drizzle. I'm starving, meowed Fireheart. He could smell the warm scent of fresh kill in the clearing. Are you coming to get something to eat? Greystripe stood behind him, his eyes distant and sad. He slowly shook his head. I just want to sleep, he muttered. Once his stomach was full, Fireheart pushed his way into the warrior's den. Greystripe was curled up in a ball, and his head tucked between his paws. Fireheart's eyes felt heavy, but his fur was still soaked, and he forced himself to wash thoroughly before settling into his warm nest. We are going to take a quick pause. I have to go clean up a mess. Sorry about that. My own cat just made a mess in the kitchen by spilling her water bowl everywhere. So, let's get back on track. Willowpelt woke Fireheart with a gentle prod. Time for the ceremony, she whispered. Fireheart lifted his head and blinked. Thanks, Willowpelt, he meowed as she ducked out of the den. He nudged Greystripe. Ceremony, he hissed, then stood and stretched up on his toes until his legs quivered. He was about to become a mentor. Excitement tingled in his paws. Greystripe stirred and uncurled slowly like an old cat. Suddenly, Fireheart's paws seemed to remember their long journey and began to ache again. At least the rain had stopped. In silence, Fireheart and Greystripe padded into the clearing. The moon shone above the trees, turning the wet branches silver. Well done for bringing WindClan home, the cheery voice made Fireheart jump. He turned to see Halftail settling down beside him. You must come and share the story with the elders one night. Fireheart nodded absently, then looked back into the clearing. Frostfur was already sitting below the high rock. A kit sat on either side of her, one smudgy gray and one ginger. The White Queen twisted her head and licked behind their ears. The little gray she-kit shook her head impatiently as her mother fussed over her. Once more, excitement made Fireheart's fur tingle. Beside him, Graystripe sat staring at the ground. "Aren't you excited?" Fireheart asked. Graystripe shrugged. "Graystripe," Fireheart lowered his voice, "White Claw's death wasn't your fault. It was the worst place for an attack, and the RiverClan cats would have known that. Sandpaw nearly fell over the edge too," he added. He glanced at Sandpaw, sitting nearby. Beside her, Dustpaw stared at Fireheart with raw jealousy in his eyes. Fireheart couldn't blame him. He was about to become a mentor when Dustpaw hadn't even been given his warrior name. But he flinched when Dustpaw leaned towards Sandpaw and whispered loud enough for Fireheart to hear. "I feel sorry for Fireheart's apprentice. Imagine a clan cat being trained by a kitty pet." But for once, Sandpaw didn't react. She just shot an uncomfortable glance at Fireheart. Fireheart turned back to Graystripe. "Bluestar doesn't blame you," he insisted. "She knows you're a good warrior. She's giving you your own apprentice." Graystripe lifted his eyes and replied bitterly, "She's just doing it because ThunderClan needs more apprentices. And why do we need them? Because I've given RiverClan an excuse to hate us." Fireheart was shocked by the harshness in Graystripe's tone. Bluestar's meow summoned them before he could say anything more. Fireheart padded toward his clan leader, Graystripe trailing after him. When they reached the center of the clearing, Bluestar gazed around at the assembly of cats. "This moon high, we gather together to name 2 new apprentices. Come forward, you 2. The gray kit darted from her mother's side into the clearing, her fluffy tail held high and her blue eyes wide. The ginger kit came forward more slowly. His ears were pricked, and he frowned with seriousness as he walked to the foot of the high rock. Fireheart's heart began to pound in his chest. Which one of these kits would be his? He couldn't help feeling that the solemn-faced ginger kit would be easier to train, but there was something about the gray kit's clumsy enthusiasm that reminded him of himself when he had first joined the clan. "From this day forward," Bluestar meowed, gazing down at the little gray kit, "until she has earned her warrior name, this apprentice will be called Cinderpaw." "Cinderpaw!" The gray kit couldn't help mewing her own name out loud. A quieting hiss came from Frostfur, and Cinderpaw ducked her head apologetically. "Fireheart," meowed Bluestar, "you are ready for your first apprentice. You will begin Cinderpaw's training." Pride swelled in Fireheart's chest. "You are fortunate, Fireheart, to have had more than one mentor. I expect you to pass on everything I taught you to this young apprentice." Fireheart suddenly began to feel a bit overwhelmed. Bluestar's words carried a weight of responsibility he wasn't sure he was ready for. "And share with her the skills you learned from Tigerclaw and Lionheart." At the mention of Lionheart, Fireheart pictured the Golden Warrior looking down on him from Silverpelt with warm, encouraging eyes. He lifted his head and returned Bluestar's gaze as steadily as he could. "And this apprentice," Bluestar turned her gaze toward the ginger kit, "will be known as Brackenpaw." Brackenpaw didn't move or make a sound. "Graystripe, you will train Brackenpaw. Our lost friend Lionheart was your mentor. I hope that his skill and wisdom will pass through you to your new apprentice." Graystripe lifted his head high at Bluestar's words, and for a moment a gleam of pride showed in his eyes. He stepped forward and touched his new apprentice's nose with his own. Brackenpaw returned the touch politely. Only his eyes, which shone like stars, gave away the fact that this young cat was as excited as his sister. As soon as Fireheart saw the pair touch noses, he realized he should have done the same. He stepped forward quickly. Cinderpaw jerked her head up, and their noses collided painfully. Cinderpaw touched his nose again, this time less awkwardly, but Fireheart's eyes were beginning to water. He could see that Cinderpaw was trying to stop her whiskers from twitching with amusement, and a flush of embarrassment washed over him. "I'm a mentor," he reminded himself. Fireheart looked around at the rest of the clan. Every cat seemed to be nodding approvingly. Then his eyes found Tigerclaw. From the edge of the clearing, the deputy's amber gaze seemed to mock him. Fireheart looked hastily down at Cinderpaw, who was staring at him with undisguised pride. Fireheart's fur suddenly began to prickle. He wanted to be a great warrior and a good mentor more than anything else, but it seemed painfully clear that Tigerclaw was just waiting for him to fail. Chapter 9. Fireheart woke to find Graystripe sitting beside him, hunched on his belly like a rabbit. Graystripe, he meowed quietly. Graystripe jumped. Are you okay? Graystripe sat up straight. I'm fine. Fireheart suspected his friend's cheery mew wasn't heartfelt, but at least he was trying to be more positive. It looks cold, Fireheart meowed. Graystripe's words had billowed out in clouds. Fireheart was still snuggled down among the warm bodies of the other warriors. It is, Graystripe bent to lick his chest. Fireheart sat up and shook his head. The air tasted of frost. What are you going to do with Brackenpaw today? He asked. Show him the forest, answered Graystripe. I could bring Cinderpaw and we could travel together. It might be better if we travel alone today, he answered Graystripe. Fireheart felt a bit hurt. They had been shown ThunderClan's hunting grounds together as apprentices. He would have liked to do it together again as mentors. But if Graystripe wanted to be by himself, then Fireheart could hardly blame him. Fine, he mewed. I'll see you later. We can share a mouse and compare apprentices. That'd be good, Graystripe meowed. Fireheart crept out of the den. The air outside was even colder. His breath swirled from his muzzle like smoke. He shivered, ruffling out his fur, and stretched one leg at a time. The ground under his paws felt like stone as he trotted over to the apprentice's den. Cinderpaw was fast asleep inside, a fluffy gray heap that rose and fell as she breathed. Cinderpaw. Cinderpaw, Fireheart called quietly, and the little gray cat lifted her head at once. Fireheart backed out, and in a moment Cinderpaw bounded from the den, wide awake and enthusiastic. What are we doing today? She mewed, looking up at him with her ears pricked. I thought I'd take you on a tour of ThunderClan territory. Will we see the Thunderpath? Asked Cinderpaw eagerly. Yes, we will, Fireheart replied. He couldn't help thinking Cinderpaw would be disappointed when she saw what a dirty, stinking place it was. Are you hungry? He asked, wondering if he should tell her to eat first. No, Cinderpaw shook her head. Oh, okay. We'll eat later, Fireheart meowed. Well, follow me. Yes, Fireheart. The young cat looked up at him, her eyes sparkling. The pang of sadness that had been lingering in Fireheart's stomach since talking to Graystripe was swept away by a warm feeling of pride. He turned and padded toward the camp entrance. Cinderpaw raced past him and charged through the gorse tunnel. Fireheart had to break into a run to catch up. I thought I said follow me, he called as she scrambled up the side of the ravine. But I want to see the view from the top, Cinderpaw protested. Fireheart leapt after her. He overtook her easily, climbed to the top, and sat washing a forepaw, keeping an eye on her as she scrambled from rock to rock. By the time she reached the top of the camp ravine, she was panting, but no less enthusiastic. Look at the trees! They look like they're made from the moonstone, she mewed breathlessly. She was right. The trees below them sparkled white in the sunshine. Fireheart took a deep breath of cold air. You should try to save your energy, he warned. We have a long way to go today. Oh, yes, okay, which way to now? She kneaded the ground with impatient paws, ready to dart away into the woods. Follow me, meowed Fireheart. He narrowed his eyes playfully. And this time, I mean follow. He led the way to a trail along the edge of the ravine into the sandy hollow where he had learned to hunt and fight. This is where most of our training sessions will be held, he explained. During Greenleaf, the trees that encircled the clearing filtered the sunshine into a warm, dappled light. Now, cold daylight streamed down onto the frozen red earth. A river ran here many moons ago. A stream still flows beyond that rise there, meowed Fireheart, pointing with his muzzle. It's dry most of the summer. That's where I caught my first prey. What did you catch? Cinderpaw didn't wait for an answer. Will the stream be frozen? Let's look and see if there's ice. She charged down into the hollow and headed toward the rise. You'll see it another time, Fireheart called, but Cinderpaw kept running and Fireheart had to race after her. He stopped beside her at the top of the rise, and together they looked down at the stream. Ice had formed at the edges, but the speed of the water as it slid over its sandy bed had stopped it from freezing over completely. You wouldn't catch much there now, mewed Cinderpaw, except fish, maybe. The sight of the spot where he had caught his first prey filled Fireheart with happy memories. He watched Cinderpaw stand at the edge of the stream and crane her neck to peer into the black water. If I were you, I'd leave fishing to RiverClan, Fireheart warned her. If I were you, I'd leave fishing to RiverClan, Fireheart warned her. If they like getting their fur wet, then let them. I prefer dry paws. Cinderpaw padded restlessly around in a circle. What now? Her excitement in his own apprentice memories filled Fireheart with energy. He bounded away, calling over his shoulder, "The owl tree!" Cinderpaw charged after him, her short fluffy tail sticking out behind her. They crossed the stream over a fallen tree Fireheart had used many times before. There are stepping stones farther down, but this is a quicker route. Be careful, though. The pale white trunk was stripped of its bark. It gets slippery when it's wet or icy. He let Cinderpaw cross first, keeping close behind in case she lost her paw hold. The stream wasn't particularly deep, but it would be cold as ice, and Cinderpaw was still too small to cope with a soaking. She crossed the log easily, and Fireheart felt a glow of pride as he watched his apprentice jump down onto the forest floor at the far end. Well done, he purred. Cinderpaw's eyes shone. Thanks, she mewed. Now where's this owl tree? This way. Fireheart bounded away through the undergrowth. The ferns had turned brown since Greenleaf. By the end of the leaf fall, they would be flattened by rain and wind, but now they stood tall and crisp. Fireheart and Cinderpaw wove their way beneath the arching fronds. Ahead, a massive oak towered above the surrounding trees. Cinderpaw tipped her head back, looking for the top. Does an owl really live here? She mewed. Yes, replied Fireheart. Can you see the hole in the trunk up there? Cinderpaw narrowed her eyes to peer through the branches. How do you know it's not a squirrel hole? Smell, Fireheart told her. Cinderpaw sniffed loudly but shook her head, her eyes curious as she looked up at Fireheart. I'll show you what squirrels smell like another time, Fireheart meowed. You won't smell any around here. No squirrel would dare make its nest so near an owl hole. Look at the ground. What do you see? Cinderpaw looked puzzled. Leaves? Try burrowing under the leaves. The forest floor was carpeted with brown oak leaves, crisp with frost. Cinderpaw began snuggling among them and then shoved her nose in right up to her ears. When she sat up, there was something the size and shape of a pine cone in her mouth. Yuck! Smells like crow food, she spat. Fireheart purred with amusement. You knew it was there, didn't you? Bluestar played the same trick on me when I was an apprentice. You'll never forget the stench. What is it? An owl pod, Fireheart explained. He remembered what Bluestar had told him. Owls eat the same prey as us, but they can't digest the bones and fur, so their bellies roll the leftovers into pods and they spit them out. If you find one of those under a tree, it means you found an owl. Why would you want to find an owl? Squeaked Cinderpaw in alarm. Fireheart's whiskers twitched as he looked into her wide eyes. As blue as her mother's, Frostfur must have told her the elder's tale of how owls carried off young kits who stayed from their mother's side. Owls get a better view of the forest than we do. On windy nights, when scents are hard to follow, you can look out for owls and follow where they hunt. Cinderpaw's eyes were still wide, but the fear had left them, and she nodded. She does listen sometimes, Fireheart thought with relief. What's next? Cinderpaw. The Great Sycamore, Fireheart decided. They traveled through the woods as the sun rose into the pale blue sky, crossing a two-legged path and another tiny stream. Eventually they arrived at the sycamore tree. It's huge, Cinderpaw gasped. Smallear says he climbed to the top branch when he was apprentice. Fireheart meowed. No way, mewed Cinderpaw. Mind you, when Smallear was an apprentice, this tree was probably only a sapling, Fireheart joked. He was still gazing up when a rustling sound behind him told him Cinderpaw had dashed off again. He sighed and chased after her through the bracken. His nose detected a familiar scent that made him nervous. Cinderpaw was heading toward Snake Rocks. Adders. Fireheart picked up his pace. He emerged from the trees and looked around anxiously. Cinderpaw was standing on a boulder at the bottom of the steep rocky slope. Come on, I'll race you to the top, she mewed. Fireheart froze, horror-struck, as she crouched ready to spring onto the next boulder. Cinderpaw, get down from there, he yelled. He held his breath as Cinderpaw turned and scrambled down again. She stood trembling, her fur on end, as Fireheart rushed over to him. This place is called Snake Rocks, he puffed. Cinderpaw looked up at him, her eyes huge. Snake rocks? Adders live up here. A bite from one of those would kill a cat as small as you. Fireheart gave Cinderpaw a quick lick on top of her head. Come on, let's have a look at the Thunder Path. Cinderpaw stopped shaking at once. The Thunder Path? Yep, meowed Fireheart. Follow me. He led Cinderpaw through the ferns, along a trail that skirted Snake Rocks, and took them to the part of the forest where the Thunder Path cut through like a hard gray river of stone. Fireheart kept one eye on Cinderpaw as they peered out from the edge of the forest. He could see her twitching tail that Cinderpaw was desperate to creep forward and sniff the Thunder Path ahead of them. A familiar roar was beginning to ruffle his ear fur, and he could feel the ground trembling beneath his paws. Stay where you are, he warned. There's a monster coming. Cinderpaw opened her mouth a little. Yuck, she mewed, screwing up her nose and flattening her ears. The rumbling noise was coming closer, and a shape appeared on the horizon. Is that a monster? She mewed. Fireheart nodded. Cinderpaw unsheathed her claws to grip the earth as the monster roared closer. She shut her eyes tight as it charged past, stirring the air around them into a storm of wind and thunder. She kept her eyes shut until the noise had faded into the distance. Fireheart shook his head to clear his scent glands. Sniff the air, he meowed. Can you smell anything apart from the Thunder Path's stench? He waited while Cinderpaw lifted her head and took several deep breaths. After a few moments, she mewed. I remember that scent from when Broken Star attacked our camp, and it was on the kits he took when you brought them home. It's ShadowClan. Is that their territory beyond the Thunder Path? Yes, Fireheart answered, feeling his fur tingle at the thought of being so close to hostile clan territory. We'd better get out of here. He decided to take Cinderpaw the long way home past Two Leg Place so she could see tall pines in the tree cut place. As they padded beneath the thin pine trees, the sense of Two Leg Place made Fireheart uneasy, even though he'd lived in a place not far from there as a kid. Stay alert, he warned Cinderpaw as she crept along behind him. Two Legs sometimes walk here with dogs. The two cats crouched under the trees to look at the fences that bordered the two-leg territory. The crisp air carried a scent to Fireheart's nose that stirred an odd feeling of warmth inside him, although he didn't know why. Look, Cinderpaw pointed with her nose as a she-cat padded along the forest floor. The light brown tabby had a distinctive white chest and white front paws. Her belly was swollen, heavy with unborn kits. Kitty pet, sneered Cinderpaw, her fur fluffed out. Let's chase her out. Fireheart expected to feel the familiar rush of aggression at the sight of a stranger on ThunderClan territory, but his hackles stayed flat. For some reason, he couldn't understand. He knew this cat wasn't a threat. Before Cinderpaw could attack, Fireheart deliberately brushed against a stalk of crunchy bracken. The she-cat looked up, disturbed by the crackling noise. Her eyes widened with alarm. Then she whipped around and set off at a lumbering pace out of the trees. Within moments, she was heaving herself over one of the two-leg fences. Rats, complained Cinderpaw. I wanted to chase her. I bet Brackenpaw will have chased hundreds of things today. Yeah, but he probably didn't nearly get bitten by an adder, replied Fireheart, twitching his tail at her. Now come on, I'm getting hungry. Cinderpaw followed him through tall pines, grumbling about the pine needles pricking her paws. Fireheart warned her to keep quiet, since there was no undergrowth here to hide in, and he felt every clan cat's discomfort at being in the open. They followed one of the stinking tracks gouged out by the tree-cut monster, and stopped at the edge of the tree-cut place. It was silent, as Fireheart knew it would be until next Greenleaf. Until then, only the track marks, deep and wide and frozen into the soil, would remind ThunderClan of the monster that lived in the forest. By the time they arrived back at camp, Fireheart was exhausted. His muscles were still weary from the long journey with WindClan. Cinderpaw looked tired too. She stifled a yawn and padded away to find Brackenpaw. Fireheart spotted Graystripe beckoning to him from beside the nettle clump. Here, I've got you some fresh kill, Graystripe meowed. He hooked a dead mouse with his claw and flung it towards Fireheart. Fireheart caught it in his teeth and lay down next to Graystripe. Good day, he mumbled with his mouth full. Better than yesterday, answered Graystripe. Fireheart glanced up at him, worried, but Graystripe went on. I enjoyed it, actually. Brackenpaw's keen to learn, that's for sure. So is Cinderpaw. Fireheart went back to chewing. Mind you, Greystripe went on with a sparkle in his eyes. I kept forgetting I was the mentor and not the apprentice. Me too, Fireheart admitted. They shared tongues until the moon rose and the coldness of the night drove them into their den. Greystripe was snoring within moments, but Fireheart felt strangely awake. The image of the pregnant she-cat kept returning to his mind, and even though he was surrounded by the familiar smells of ThunderClan, her soft kitty pet scent lingered in his nostrils. He fell asleep at last, but his dreams all carried the same scent, until finally he dreamed of his days as a kit. He remembered lying beside his mother's belly, curled in a bed softer than any forest moth with his brothers and sisters, and still the scent of the she-cat lingered. Fireheart opened his eyes suddenly, jolted out of his sleep. Of course! The she-cat he had seen in the woods was his sister. And that is where we'll stop for the night. So I hope everyone enjoyed listening, and I hope you have a good evening and a good night. I'm going to also thank Jenny for the follow. I know it happened at the start, but still, thank you. So until next time, my friends, sleep tight.